I was scrolling through Facebook Marketplace when I saw this.
A 1970s Hollywood Regency Lotus lamp, which can retail upwards of $2,000. And I've always wanted one, but I couldn't believe I was finding one locally for $25. And to my surprise, it actually worked. But it was missing about 15 glass petals. So I found a seller on Etsy who sold replacement petals, and I spent about $80 on those. I then cleaned the body with some crud cutter and polished with Brasso, which really helped bring the lamp back to life. I then used some needle nose pliers to loosen the original glass petals. I then cleaned the glass petals that I already had with some warm soapy water and a scrub brush. You would not believe how much dirt came off of these glass petals. It was nasty. I then reassembled the petals and placed the new ones inside. And just like that, I had restored a $2,000 Hollywood Regency Lotus lamp. All it took was a few minutes of scrubbing, and it only cost me about $100 total. I even put LED grow lights inside the lamp to help my houseplants grow. I absolutely love the look of this lamp, and now I really want to collect them.
I thought I won the lottery, but it turns out I just got scammed. When I saw these Merton Gershon American and Martinsville nightstands listed for free, I thought I struck gold. I knew the blue paint would be a real pain to get off, but if it's free, it's for me. I got straight to stripping, and wow, was it a satisfying strip, no pun intended. Look how that paint was sliding right off. I actually thought to myself, this actually might not be so bad, but I immediately revoked that thought once I got to the fluted drawers. I stripped, I scraped, I scrubbed. Each drawer took me a week, because not only were they fluted for a faux bamboo look, but they also had a bajillion decorative wormhole things on the fluting. I used a sharp tip screwdriver to remove the paint from each one. I felt like Dr. Pimple Popper. This part was fun and satisfying for like a total of 3 seconds. After a full month of removing the paint, I was finally able to sand and get started on repairing the veneer with epoxy putty. I attempted to remove some of the dark stains with several rounds of oxalic acid, but unfortunately I didn't have much success, but I still continued on. I sanded everything down with 120 grit, working my way up to 180. I couldn't believe it. I was finally getting to the end stages of this flip, or so I thought. I applied an oil-based conditioner, and then it was finally time for stain. I went with a walnut gel stain in hopes that it would cover some of the remaining dark marks, and as you can see, that was an immediate mistake. Now here's where we started, and here's where we are now. So I need your help on what to do next, because I've already spent 2 months working on these. I'd like to avoid paint, but that might be my only option. I've spent the last 2.5 months of my life working on these rare Merton Gershon nightstands that I got for free, only for them to turn out like this. They're giving pretzel rods. So most of you told me to paint them, but I just couldn't give up that easily. So to start fresh, I sanded everything down and wiped off any dust with mineral spirits. Because naturally, I decided to dig myself into an even bigger financial hole by going the veneer route. So I cut the veneer sheets to size, and I peeled off the sticker backing, and I secured it onto the nightstands with a brayer tool. I trimmed most of the excess off with electric scissors, and then I refined it all with a utility knife. I'm actually really happy that I went with adhesive backed veneer versus having to apply contact cement, even though it was a bit more expensive. It was just a lot easier. And I unfortunately did not have any walnut banded veneer on hand, so I had to create my own, but this part was actually the easiest. Then came the pretzel rod drawer fronts. I decided the only way to save them was with black paint. So my plan was to see how the wormholes looked after a few coats and then reevaluate the texture to see if I still needed to fill them in. My last step was to apply some oil polyurethane. Now remember, here's where we started, here's where I had my mental breakdown, and here's the final result. I got these Lane cedar chest side tables for $30. I even found a massive bullet in one of them. They were covered in baby blue paint with another layer of dark blue on one and red on the other. I stripped off the old paint, which came off pretty easily. I then used a carbide scraper to get off any of the remaining gunk, and after that, I sanded every inch with 120 grit. There were a few dark spots and stains, so I mixed wood bleach with hot water and scrubbed with steel wool to remove them. For repairs, I used quick wood epoxy putty. Once it was dry, I sanded it down smooth. I decided to use a gel stain since I've always had trouble in the past when staining white oak. I then color matched my repairs with my new favorite product, Mohawk Blend-All Sticks. Pricey, but worth it. I then sealed my repairs with a vinyl sealer and satin lacquer. Here's the before, and here's the after. These side tables were definitely challenging, but I'm really happy with how they turned out. Did you know the serial number on Lane Furniture is the date of manufacturing, but backwards? Meaning this pair was manufactured on May 28, 1959. How cool is that? I audibly gasped when my uncle sent me a picture of this slatted mid-century modern bench that he had, and I immediately knew what it was, so I offered to refinish it on my trip home. With limited supplies, I made it happen somehow, using my battery-operated orbital sander and 120 grit sandpaper, working my way up to 180 and 220. Thankfully, the finish came off so easily. I didn't touch the legs of this piece because they were in good condition, so I was praying that this leftover stain would be a good match, and miraculously, it was. After the stain dried, I applied 3 coats of a wipe-on polyurethane, and I like to hand sand with a high grit sandpaper between coats. Then the transformation was finally complete. Now here's the before and here's the after. I was scrolling through Facebook Marketplace when I saw something in the background of the canoe listing photo. It looked to me like a mid-century modern Drexel buffet, so naturally I messaged the seller and he agreed to sell it to me for $50. Was it worth $50? I'm not sure because it was in horrendous condition. My first step was sanding off the old stain and finish with 120 grit sandpaper. I fixed the floppy veneer with some wood glue and painter's tape. Then it was the time to address the giant chunks missing from this piece. I used so much epoxy putty to rebuild the edge inside of this buffet along with all the chips, and once it cured, I sanded it all down smooth. I used Mohawk medium brown walnut wiping stain as a nod to the original color. Then I was faced with the task of blending in all the repairs, which took me forever. Like, I really put these Blendall sticks to work. And yes, I probably should have just replaced the veneer, but you live and you learn. So to seal, I used several coats of a semi-gloss lacquer and the transformation was finally complete. Now here's the before and here's the after. I'm very happy with how it turned out and I truly love the design. There are just some legs I'd recognize anywhere, especially on Facebook Marketplace. So when I saw this boomerang coffee table, I immediately messaged the seller and paid her asking price of $150, which I thought was way too expensive, but this table is my Roman Empire, so I sucked it up. After a good clean, I sanded off the old finish with 120 grit, which revealed this dreamy two-tone. I wanted a simple and durable finish, so I slathered on some tung oil. It looked delicious. I'll apply about 5 to 6 coats total, waiting a few hours between each coat, and lastly, I used some veneer paint to fix some small blemishes and the transformation was complete. Now here's the before and here's the after. I can't believe how just a little bit of oil revived this table, and it was so easy too. I just love this table so much, but I still can't confirm if this table is Adrian Pearsall or Kohler because it doesn't have a maker's mark. My thrift store illegally sold me this chest for $80. Lane Cedar chests have been recalled twice for having over 14 fatal accidents due to the auto-locking latch. So my first step with this piece was to remove the lock. Then it was time to give it a good clean. Overall, the piece was in decent condition, so I decided to only refinish the top, sanding it with 120 grit. There were some chips to the veneer, so I used pre-colored epoxy putty to fill them in. Once they were dry, I sanded them down to be flush with the veneer. To seal the top, I applied 3 coats of wipe-on oil-based polyurethane, and I also applied a light layer to the rest of the piece just to revive it. My last step was to camouflage some of the blemishes with my veneer paint kit, and the transformation was complete. Now here's the before and here's the after. You're probably thinking, well, that looks the same, and yes, that's the point. My goal is to honor the original piece and fix it up so it can be loved for another 60 plus years.
Do you guys remember the $1,000 green chair I found for $5 a few weeks ago? Well, my boyfriend's mom found a dresser for me to flip, and it was designed by Eliel Saarinen, the father of Aereo, aka the guy who designed the Gateway Arch, and she only paid $10. I started off by sanding and scraping off the old finish. I attempted to fix some of the veneer damage with wood glue and painter's tape. I used plastic wood filler to fix any of the chip veneer and sanded it down smooth. I applied an oil-based wood conditioner on every inch of the dresser and let it sit overnight, which I thought was such a mistake when I saw how it brought out the red tones. Thankfully, the gel stain I used toned down the red significantly. I flipped this dresser up at the family summer cabin, so I had limited supplies and no dust extractor, so I used Mohawk Blendall sticks to fix the chip veneer and all the veneer that I burned through, since it was much harder to see what I was doing with all the dust. My bad. I sealed it all up with some satin lacquer, or should I say lacquer. In case you forgot, here's the water damage before and here's the after. This dresser is a little piece of modern architectural history, and I'm shook I've come across 2 original pieces designed by the Saarinen family. I'm so happy with how it came out, especially with my limited supplies and limited experience working with mahogany. Now for the moment of truth. Would you pay $3,000 for this dresser? Let me know in the comments.